Let me start by saying that monsters exist in this world, and they're not ghosts or demons, but very real people who mean you harm. My family still hasn't recovered from the terror we experienced last summer, and I'm worried they may never fully heal. I'll start at the beginning and do my best to tell the story. My wife and I decided to take the kids on a small family vacation. Nothing crazy, just a few nights away at the ocean. I was surprised to see that finding houses on Airbnb was cheaper than the hotels that were available. My wife found this awesome place that wasn't right on the ocean, but it was only a 5-minute walk, and it was way cheaper than staying on the ocean. The house was directly at the back of a dead-end street, and behind the house was a creek, so it felt very private, which was cool. We got to the beach town in the mid-afternoon, and we spent several hours at the beach before heading to the house. My son was 8, and my daughter was 13, and usually they fight constantly, but something about being at the ocean caused them to play together like good siblings. This would probably be the highlight of the trip, because things start going downhill after that. We got to the house at 5 and unpacked our bags. The kiddos claimed to their rooms, and we all got cleaned up from the beach. My wife brought a bunch of meals to cook, instead of us having to go out every night. She loves to cook, which I love. There really is nothing better than a home-cooked meal. The deal is, she cooks and I do the dishes. It seems like a fair trade-off. That night, we stayed up for a few hours and played on, and then we eventually went to bed. I slept like a baby that night. I wish I could have said the same thing about my son. The next morning, he looked exhausted. At breakfast, the poor kid barely touched his food. When I asked him what was wrong, he just put his head down and didn't say anything. He almost looked embarrassed. After a little bit of prying, he finally caved in and told me what was wrong. He claimed that he saw ghosts the previous night. Yes, you heard me correctly. My 8-year-old son claimed to have seen ghosts. When I asked him to explain more, he told me that he saw the shadows move around in the backyard. He looked out the window and saw several shadows come up to the house and disappear for a while, then eventually go back into the tree line, which was right before the creek, he said. One of the shadows even turned around at one point and waved at him. The poor kid was in tears while he was telling me whatever he saw, or whatever he thought he saw. It clearly freaked him out. My wife and I, and even my daughter, were giving him the ghost stare. In real talk, it took a little while, but he finally started acting like himself again. We went to the beach that day and had another fun day together, hitting waves and building sandcastles. When we got back to the house, I noticed that the door wasn't locked. I asked my wife if she had locked it, and she wasn't sure. I'm compulsive about locking the door, and unfortunately, she isn't. I would have been more annoyed, but anything of value that we had was with me, and after a little walk around the house, nothing looked out of place. Another evening of cooking and card games, and then the kids went to bed around 10 p.m. My wife and I stayed up for a little bit longer and had a few drinks. I didn't look at the exact time, but I would say it was nearly midnight when my son knocked on our bedroom door. He could barely talk, and the poor kid was trembling. He said, "The ghosts are back, and they're in the backyard again." I sprang up and looked out all the windows, and I didn't see anything. I kept asking him to point them out, but he was too scared to even look out the window. The only thing that was admittedly a little weird was that the backyard floodlight was on, but that could have been set off by anything, like the wind or even an animal. I spent the next few minutes trying to comfort him and tell him everything was okay. When he finally spoke, he barely got the words out. He said one of the ghosts tapped on his window. He told him that if he screamed, he would hurt his entire family. According to my son, he asked the ghost to leave him alone, and apparently, the ghost said he'd leave him alone if he opened the door. Instead of opening the door, my son came to wake us up. I was scared, but not because I thought ghosts were real, rather because something was clearly terrifying my poor son. I was thinking maybe my daughter showed him a movie or something that he wasn't supposed to see. Or maybe he was just homesick since he hadn't traveled much as a family. That night, he slept with us, and I didn't sleep very well because I could feel him shaking all night. The kid was truly scared out of his mind. At breakfast, it was the same as the day before. He barely touched his food, and he looked like he was about to collapse into his scrambled eggs. I pitched an idea to him and the rest of the family. I proposed that we have a camp out in the living room. We can make a fort, and we'll all sleep together. It'll be like a family sleepover or something. The kids loved it, especially my son. If he was gonna see the ghosts tonight, at least I'd be there with him. We played games for a while, but eventually we all fell asleep. At 2:30 in the morning, my son was shaking me awake and said that the ghosts were outside. I got up, expecting to see nothing. And I couldn't be more wrong. At the sliding door were 3 hooded figures, wearing these creepy black masks with these bulging white eyes. They almost looked like golf balls. I shouted some kind of nonsense out of fear, and that woke up my wife and daughter. As soon as they saw the masked figures, they started to scream and shout. During all the commotion, I saw one figure trying to open the sliding door, but thankfully it was locked. My daughter, thinking quickly on her feet, called 911. I grabbed a big walking stick that was inside the house and approached the door. I realized that if they had real weapons, the walking stick would be useless. But I was in fight or flight mode and I had to protect my family. I started yelling at them to leave my family alone, and they looked like they were taunting me. Almost like they were enjoying the mental pain they were putting my family through. The person on the left side of the door pulled out what looked like a knife and started waving it back and forth. My family was in tears and continued screaming for their lives. I'll never forget those horrible screams. And then, out of nowhere, almost like a scene from a movie, I saw the person at the end get tackled by a police officer. The other 2 sprinted away but didn't get very far, as they were also caught by the local police force. They were arrested, and when I saw the faces under the masks, I was almost more afraid. There were 3 young men, just normal-looking guys. I found out months later that 2 of the men were 20, and one of them was 18. My son thought these 3 masked men were ghosts because it was dark, and they were dressed in all black. When they were apprehended, I was informed that all 3 of them had a knife on them, not just the one guy who showed his knife. I'm convinced these random young men were targeting us specifically, considering they kept coming back. After talking extensively with local law enforcement, apparently there's a group of punks in the area that target tourists, especially tourists with families. I guess they assume that tourists with families have more money, and when they have kids, they're easier targets. The police weren't overly concerned, which made me fear that this happens all too often. It makes me sad and angry that these types of people exist in the world. You hear stories like this all over the internet, but you never think it could happen to you. Especially on vacation. The police seem to think that they wouldn't have physically harmed us, and they only wanted our money. But no one knows what they were capable of doing if they were able to get through that sliding door. Not to mention, the mental scars we got from this trip will last a lifetime. Sometimes the mental scars are much more painful than the physical ones. I don't actually know what became of these men, and thankfully, I'll never find out, because I will never be returning to that Airbnb or that beach town for the rest of my life.